mission of Generation Church, your mission, is to empower every generation to find purpose in the message, in the cause of Christ, so that together we can change the world. We're not here just to have church. We're not here just to have a great community and a lot of social activities. We're actually here to change the world. In every generation, if you're old, you have a part in this. If you're young, you have a part in this. If you're in the middle of your life and you got kids tearing your house down around you, you still have a part of this. It's for every generation to find purpose in the message and the cause of Christ. And I invite you in this to be a part of this, to take this vision and to run with it. You know, God gives the vision, but you have to pick it up. You have to own it. You set the pace. You determine when it happens. You determine how it happens. Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 2 says this, "Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it." So we've made it plain. Your response is, how are you going to run with what you've heard? Happy New Year, Generation Church. How are we doing today? So good to see everybody here, to our church family watching online. So glad you guys have tuned in as well. Definitely hit us up in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from, how we can serve you. If you're new to Generation Church, you're live in the house, welcome to the family. Welcome home. So glad that you guys are here. I know that God has a purpose for you today, and I feel like God has just given me a word today for you and for this next year ahead. And it's not always like that, but today I just feel a real sense of purpose in today's message. But today we got a lot going on. We're going to celebrate what God did in 2024 and just take a look back and really reminisce on some of the amazing moments. And then I've got this word that I want to share with you that we'll share at the end. But then prayer and fasting starts next week. And so eat everything you can now, so that you're ready to go for 14 days of prayer and fasting starting next Sunday, and we'll kick it off. And then we've got 2 Wednesday nights in the middle where you can come and we're going to pray together as a church family and do some worship and just have an encouraging message. And then we're going to break our fast at the end of that with our food packing event for the Dominican Republic. We are going to eat before we pack food, so you're not tempted to eat freeze-dried food. Make sure that you're marking your calendars and you're ready for all of that. All the information is on the website, and so if you want to go to generationchurch.com, you can check it out. Or if you want to grab your phone and tap the tag that's on the seat in front of you or any of the tap tags that are around the facility, that's probably the best way. It'll take you to all the resources for fasting. So if you want to read about different types of fasts and just what does the Bible say about that, all that is there for you to look at and to determine what God has for you. And that's what I would encourage you to do, to take some time this week in preparation for the fast and really just ask God, what type of fast do you want me to do? And then just be obedient to whatever he tells you. You know, so today is a special weekend. Today we are going to celebrate what God did in 2024. And here's what I know about looking back. You know, there are high points in the previous year, but there are also probably some low points. And so there are some things we're going to celebrate, but I realize that within the crowd and those of you watching online, there are probably some struggles. And as we move into 2025, there are going to be some bright spots, but there are probably going to be some struggles in 2025. And so I believe just God's overarching message for us today is this, and I want you to walk away with this, is that no matter what happens in life, whether you're in an up moment or a down moment, that God is always faithful. Because there are some times in our lives where things don't go the way that we want them to go, and the volume level of that negative moment tends to outpace the volume of the positive moments. And sometimes we can get into a place where the negativity of past moments speaks so loud that we forget how faithful God is. And it's important for us to always look back and to remember that. And I was just thinking about, you know, all that God has done in this church over the past 16 years. I could not have seen 16 years ago when we were launching this church all that God wanted to do. All the lives that would be changed, all the supernatural things that God was going to do in people's lives. And there were a lot of down moments in the past 16 years and a lot of high points in the past 16 years. And I've had to really learn how to focus and celebrate the high points, because those tell me, they prescribe for me what God is going to do in the future. And it'll do the same thing for you. As I was thinking about it as well over this past year, we've had a really amazing year. There's been a lot of life change. I watched so many people give their lives to the Lord, so many families restored, marriages restored, kids giving their lives to the Lord. God is just giving us a massive revival in the young people of our church. And as I was thinking about it, probably one of the high points for me was Trish McClung's mother was unborn again. She was not saved, and she was struggling in her health. And so Trish called Melissa, and Melissa went over to the hospital and just ministered to her. And Trish got the opportunity to lead her mother to the Lord in her 90s. And then a few weeks after that, many of you guys got to witness this. We had the opportunity to baptize her. So we wheeled her in on a wheelchair, and I'm watching like all y'all cry. And so got to baptize her, and then it wasn't long after that she went home to be with the Lord. And guys, that's exactly what it's all about. It's about life change. It's about people who don't know Jesus, who are far from Christ, coming into a church family, and the church family wrapping their arms around them, and them meeting their Creator for the first time. And so we're going to reminisce and celebrate about that. But, honestly, none of that would be possible if it were not for all of you. God gives a vision to a pastor, to a leader, give a vision to Moses, but Moses couldn't do anything more than the people were willing to do. So God gives the vision, but you set the pace. You determine when, how, and where, and how fast we accomplish what God has done. And this past year, God has done a lot of things because you have engaged the vision, and you have picked it up, and you have ran with it, and you've ran fast. And so I just want to take a moment. Can we just honor all the people who serve in any capacity? You started volunteering this weekend, or you're on staff. Anybody in between, you serve. Would you just stand for a moment? Can we honor you? All of our broadcast people as well, can we honor you? Thank you for what you do. God has been doing a lot through us, and a lot of life change, a lot of people that are far from Christ coming to know Him. And when I was thinking about that for preparation and this message, God just kind of took me back over the past 5 or 6 years. And, we were meeting in a storefront 5 or 6 years ago, and we kind of reached a wall as a church. We weren't really reaching any more people, and so God began to give us a vision to launch out into deeper waters. And so we started a project to buy this property and to renovate it, and it cost us $5 million to do that in 2 years, and it was a pretty long and arduous project. That was when God gave me the word rise. It's time for you guys to rise, to pick up what you've been doing, the foundation you've been building on, and let's take the gospel to Jupiter in an expanded way. And so we bought this building, and then COVID happened, and on May 5th, we got our CO, and we're sitting as a staff in that foyer with a $5 million mortgage, and no people couldn't come to church. And I was like, how are we going to pay this? And but it was amazing in that dip that God was faithful. As a matter of fact, our church grew financially when y'all didn't even come. The tithes went up. I was like, well, let's just not go back at all. We'll just do online from here on out. Low overhead, sell the building. They give more when they don't come. It must be my preaching. I'm not sure what causes it to go down. But here's the point. It was a dip, and it was honestly a scary moment where I really had to say, okay, I'm on the hook for this, and who knows when this thing is going to be over. And I had to go back to God's faithfulness time and time again and remember those moments. And that helped me as a pastor to lead us through that. And I didn't know that we were going to grow financially at that point. So I really had to trust God in that. And maybe you have some moments over the past year where there has been a dip and you haven't seen the fruit of it yet. But I want to encourage you to trust God because He is faithful. And so God called us to rise up, and then God called us after we got into this facility and we've been, working out all the kinks and bugs, and God called us to run, to take the gospel from the seats to the streets. And so we started doing tons of outreach and just reaching people all around the community, and the church started growing again, and we're rebuilding after COVID. And then God called us to reach, to extend our tent stakes. And God posed a specific question to me. He said, Ben, if Generation Church ceased to exist, would anybody outside of the walls of that church even know it was gone? And I thought to myself, I don't know, God. Are we reaching people? Are we making an impact in our city? And so we had a mission to reach our city, to impact our city in a way that they could not miss. And so many of you stepped up to that. Jim McGuire stepped up and started meeting with the police department, town officials, and we started doing food distribution. And now, as a testimony of that vision, when there are issues or problems or the town or the police department needs spiritual guidance, they call our church office. There was a suicide that happened that was a really stressful situation for the police department. They called the church office wanting counsel. Guys, that doesn't happen in normal circumstances. Normally, the local municipalities and police are not reaching out to local churches. It is a testimony of what you guys have done. And the town council continues to partner with us for the food distribution and give money to a church to buy food to give to people in the community. That is unheard of. But it's because you guys have picked up a vision that God gave us and have ran with it. And so we begin to make an impact in this community. And obviously, the result of that is the community has taken note, and they know that Generation Church is a place of hope and help and healing. And so this year, as we go through the wins of 2024, I want to encourage you. You've got this printout in your seat. You can follow along with that. But the reason why we do what we do is for changed lives. I mean, we count souls because souls count to God. And that's really why we're here. It's the only reason God leaves us on planet Earth after we give our lives to him is because there are other people who are far from him. And the mission of Jesus is the only mission that really matters. And so in this past year, there were 160 plus decisions to follow Jesus. Come on, somebody. That's amazing. In years past, we would give a salvation altar call, but it was more of, kind of more of an atmosphere and a moment, and the keys were making me sound way more spiritual than I actually am. And we got a lot of hands raised out of that, but there wasn't a lot of true conversions that were happening out of that. And so a few years ago, the Lord really started to deal with me about that salvation moment. And it is now more of a gospel presentation. And the fruit of that is that those 160 people that are making those decisions are making real lasting decisions. It wasn't an emotional response. And we see that in the baptisms. So 63 baptisms, that's where people are taking that second step, which is amazing. And then 212 first-time guests this past year. That's because you're inviting friends and family to come to church, and that is translating into lives changed. So Generation Church, amazing, great job. There are more people to reach in this community. We're going to continue to reach them in 2025. But it's not also just what we've done locally. We also have done a lot around the world globally. So last year we gave $40,000+ towards missions around the world. Some of the things that we have been supporting and working on is our outreach in Pakistan with Generation Worship Center. Bishop Mushtaq is a great friend of mine, and he oversees about 5,000 new believers in the nation of Pakistan, which is in the high 90s percentage points a Muslim nation. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you remember a few years ago that Easter bombing and shooting that took place in Pakistan. That was with Bishop Mushtaq. Actually, one of his staff people got shot in the face. So he is leading the charge in a very hostile to the gospel environment. And you guys don't know this, but you pay for half of their operating budget every single month. You pay for half of it. And then this past year, we gave them $20,000 to start a building project because they've outgrown their space and they're moving into a new facility. And so God is doing amazing things in Pakistan because of you. Also, Children's Cup, we support them financially with Hope Zones around the nation for kids, and they're ministering to kids and providing school programs for those kids, and really just bringing Jesus to kids in nations that are far from God. We also are working with World Compassion, and we give to them every single month. World Compassion, their mission is to take the gospel to the most hostile environments on planet Earth. And so they kind of talk about their mission to the Middle East, which is very Muslim in nature. And they say, we use bad people to do good things because they work with the drug smugglers in the Middle East who are smuggling drugs out of the Middle East. And then they load those planes up with Bibles, and they smuggle Bibles back into the Middle East. And so don't look at me so holy. I know it's probably... You wouldn't use bad people to do good things, but they are. And God is doing amazing things in the Middle East. I mean, there are people getting saved by the thousands, and they're doing programs and Bible schools in the Middle East, and people are meeting Jesus in the Middle East because some drug smugglers are smuggling Bibles. And by the way, they're preaching to the drug smugglers as well, too. We're not forgetting them. And so that's part of what you support. 2J Ministries as well. Ron and Cheryl Wallen, right here in our own church family, run and operate an outreach in Uganda. They're building a hospital, and they minister to the leper colonies. They have a children's program, and you guys give towards that every single week. And then locally this past year, about $200,000+ was given or invested into our local community ministries and outreaches here. Hands and Feet, our Christmas project that you guys just engaged, 190 travel bags were given to foster kids. And a lot of these foster kids, when they go from one family to the next, they put their belongings in a trash bag. And that's all they have. And so you guys provided 190 bags, about $25,000 worth of resources to those kids so they have travel bags. That's amazing. Tim Tebow's Night to Shine. We've been doing that for a few years, and it's packed out. This will be the last year that we do it in this facility because we can't fit everybody. But that's about $25,000 that your tithe goes towards to minister to special needs students, and it's a prom for special needs kids. It's amazing. If you've never been a part of Night to Shine, you got to get up out of this service after it's over, unless the preaching is bad. You can get up in the middle, and if you go out there and sign up for Night to Shine and check out all the things that we're doing in 2025. Food distribution, get this, 45 tons of food has been given to 1,800 families this year through the outreach of Generation Church and Jim and the Frezes and the whole team there. 400,000 meals were packed for hurricane victims, and you guys are ready. So we decided to go 400,000, and then we're going to scale it back to 60, so you guys can do that one in your sleep. Our block parties, Easter block parties, fall block parties, over 1,500 people came through those, and so many people are coming to those block parties, and then they come to church because Pastor Mike has their phone number, and so invites them back, and then they come and they get connected to Jesus. It's really amazing. $44,000 in benevolence was given. First Care, the Walk for Life, it's a ministry for mothers that are on the verge of having an abortion. And First Care does some of the most important and critical ministry in our area. And it is the #1 ministry in our area along these lines. And so they do a walk every single year. And you guys may not know this, but Generation Church is always the largest fundraiser for the Walk for Life. And so if you have any interest in that at all, I would encourage you. It's every October. Get involved and engaged. Bill and Darlene Alexander lead that. And from that, the fruit from that is several hundred babies that would be aborted every single year are given a chance at life. And God has purpose for them and a plan for them. UMOM, Impact City, our Serve Day, $20,000 this year went to ARC for church planting, and all of those things total $271,462 that was invested into your community and around the world for the sake of the gospel. That's amazing, guys. So if you wonder where your tithe goes, that's where your tithe goes. It goes to change lives and to minister to hurting people around the world. And we don't ask you to do anything that we don't do personally. So this church gives over and above 10% of its income out to the communities to reach people for Jesus. And if you have never tithed, I would just encourage you to take that next step in obedience to God and watch what He does in your life as you do that. So we're going to continue to impact our community and surrounding areas. As you guys know, from November, we're going to be launching a campus in 2025 in the Stewart area, which we're super excited about. We're also exploring opportunities to expand here in the Jupiter location. We're launching a ton of ministries. Go check them out in the foyer, and we're going to continue to give you information about that. Freedom Groups, Jeremy and Marquila Freeland and the whole team are doing an amazing job. If you have never been a part of Freedom Groups, you got to go and check out Freedom, the Freedom Conference. It will change your life. This was probably the most powerful Freedom Conference we've had to date. And it's amazing because all of us have things that are in our lives that we need freedom from. Whether it's family of origin issues or things that you've been hurt by growing up or things that maybe you got involved in that you shouldn't have or somebody did something. All of us have hurts and pains and hang-ups. And if you haven't been a part of Freedom, you got to go. And you got to go to the conference. Don't just go to the group. Make sure you go all the way through to the conference. If you miss the conference, it's like going to a restaurant, paying the bill for the food and not eating the meal. You got to go to the conference. It will change your life. Guys, you guys did an amazing job. In 2024, you crushed the vision. You picked it up. You ran with it. And I know God has more for us in 2025. But, all that is translated into a lot of growth this year. And, our 3 services are continuing to fill up. 37% growth in attendance, 29% online, 50% growth in students. God is doing an amazing work in the students and young adults. 55 new Dream Teamers serving. We've found that people grow and mature fastest when they come to church and they start serving on a team. Way faster than if they come and just spectate, or even if they come and get involved in groups. When they get involved on a team and they actually begin to serve, Jesus said, the greatest among us is the greatest servant. That is the place where the growth, your own spiritual growth, happens the best. And so if you're not serving, I would encourage you to do that as well. And so as God is calling us to expand and grow and reach and meet new people and bring them into the kingdom of God, there's a lot of work in front of us. There's a campus that needs to be launched. There's growth that's happening here, parking lots that need to be built. God has called us to rise, to run, to reach, and now he's calling us to build his church. And building his church starts with building you as an individual. And that's our focus for 2025 and beyond, is to build you first. And as we build you and in discipling you and reaching people for him, we will then need to build buildings in order to house worship for folks. And so it's an exciting season, and I would encourage you to be a part of it. But here's what I know is in the scope of life, we all have visions and we all have dreams and we all have things that we want to accomplish, but they don't always turn out the way that we want to. And I want to take a moment as we have the second half of today's service, and I just want to do a gear shift if I can. I want to celebrate what we accomplished in 2024, but I also don't want to forget that there are probably some things from 2024 that were difficult. There are probably some issues in your life that you didn't really feel like turned out the way they should. And I just felt like God just put me on assignment this weekend to really minister to some of those needs. And to really minister to some of those things that you might be dealing with. Because maybe you have forgotten that God is always faithful. Maybe some of the negative from last year has had a louder voice than the positive. And you're looking into 2025 and you're wondering, am I going to make it through? Is this thing that's been bothering me going to get fixed, or is it going to get worse? God, have you forgotten about me? Do you have something for me? I mean, maybe the negativity of last year is trying to drown out the dreams for next year. But God sent me here today to help you understand and to know and to latch on to the idea that God is faithful. So God instructed me to unpack the story of Joseph. And if you're new to church, you're watching online, you may not be familiar with Joseph. Joseph is one of those people in the Bible that is like a keystone character, a keystone figure, a type of Christ in the Bible. Joseph was a boy among many brothers that grew up, and he was the beloved son. He was a second to the youngest. And his father gave him a special coat and just loved him dearly. And that created some animosity and some jealousy with his other brothers. And these other brothers would end up becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. So these brothers were the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. This part of the history of the Jewish people is critical. This is where the dream was actually beginning to come to pass. So God gave this guy Joseph a dream. And in his dream, he saw sheaves of wheat bending or bowing down to him. And it represented his brothers. God was elevating him in the sight of the rest of his family. And they got pissed by it. And they began to grumble. And then God gave him another dream. And in the second dream, his own parents bowed down to him in that dream. And so his dad was like, son, you need to chill. He probably didn't use the most amount of tact as a young boy sharing God's dream with everybody around him, and it created some negativity. And so that got him thrown into a pit. His brothers decided, we're done with you, you dreamer. They threw him into a pit. They thought he was dead, and that took him from a pit into a prison. And then he found himself in prison, and from prison, he ended up in the palace, Pharaoh's palace. And there was this long journey of 16 years where God had put a dream in a young man's heart, but there was a lot of negative moments that tried to make him forget God's faithfulness. Maybe you have some dreams that God has given you, but the negativity around you is trying to erase the idea that God is always faithful. So as we celebrate last year, we can't let the challenges drown out what we're trying to celebrate. This is what Joseph did well, is he always went back to what God had done. He celebrated the wins. When he got thrown in a pit, he celebrated that he had a dream. When he got thrown into prison, he celebrated that God had a purpose for him. And all throughout his life, he looked back and he said, you know what? Even in the bad moments, God, I trust that you are always faithful. So even though it seemed at times that God was absent, Joseph's dreams kept telling him that God would be faithful. And in the scripture, it tells us that faith and patience inherit the promise. Meaning that we've got to have some faith and some trust in God, that even when things don't go the way that we want them to go, that God is going to make good on the promise. It's faith. We have to believe God, even in the dips of life. But then we also have some patience. There's got to be something in us that says, you know what, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait on God until it happens. I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm not going to let the negativity destroy my dream. I'm just going to keep going. 16 years ago when we started this church, if I had let the circumstances and situations dictate whether we were going to continue to pastor this church, we would have closed it down a long time ago. But there's a vision, there's a dream, there's something that God has birthed inside of us that regardless of the negative situations that happen, we're never going to throw in the towel. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. He never forgot them, and he never gave up on them. So if you want to write some things down, here's a title for today: 3 stressful situations in which to remember God's faithfulness, from Joseph's story. Here's the first one. We have to remember that God is faithful even when people are not. God is faithful even when people are not. Some of you have some people who have not been faithful to you. Maybe in your marriage, maybe a business partner, maybe some family members, maybe some friends. Maybe it's been a place of employment, or maybe you have some employees that haven't been faithful. We've all got some places where people have not been faithful to us, but people's unfaithfulness does not erase God's faithfulness. It may feel like it from time to time when people betray you, which is what happened to Joseph, his own flesh and blood. They betrayed him and they threw him in a pit and they meant to murder him because of a dream that he had. People don't always celebrate your success. In Genesis 39 and verse 18, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. And as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns or pits. And we can tell our father that a wild animal has eaten him. And then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben, who was one of the older brothers, heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed blood? Let's just throw him in this empty pit here in the wilderness. And then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. But Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to their father. You know, betrayal is one of the most difficult things to deal with when someone betrays you. And when someone betrays you, it feels like nobody is with you. It feels like everybody is against you. And maybe that's made up in our own minds, but when you're in the middle of betrayal, you feel all alone. But there's always a Reuben. You may not know it. You may not see it. You may not know who it is, but God always has a Reuben that is there when somebody's betraying you. Joseph didn't know that Reuben was working behind the scenes to keep them from killing him, but he was. And you may have some problems in your life. You may have some dreams that have gone south, some people that have betrayed you, but there's always somebody that's in your corner. And they will reveal themselves at the appropriate time, but God will use them. And you just have to keep hanging on, even in the midst of business deals that go south and things that get sold out from under you and partnerships and all kinds of dealings that fall apart, relationships, friendship, all of those things that involve betrayal. You can't forget that God is always faithful. Because people are not excited about your success doesn't mean that God has lost his excitement about your success. And maybe some of you today in this room or watching online, you're reeling from a betrayal that happened in 2024. It wasn't supposed to work that way, but it did. And it's clouded your ability to trust God in 2025. It's trying to set itself up as truth. And it's trying to tell you that because that can happen, that your dream is not going to come to fruition. But that's a lie, because God is faithful, even in our betrayals. God always is working on our behalf. What I find interesting about Joseph's story is that Joseph had a dream that he was going to be elevated and that people would bow down to him and honor him. But he couldn't actualize that dream or live out that dream in Canaan where he lived. He actually needed to be in Egypt for that to happen. And in some kind of weird way, his brothers had to betray him in order to get his proximity closer to the palace of Pharaoh. And sometimes in our lives, there are some things that happen. Now, God doesn't cause the betrayal, but God will use some times in our lives where we get betrayed to position us in a closer proximity to our dream. If his brothers hadn't sold him into slavery, hadn't put him in that pit, he would have never made it to Egypt. And if he had lost sight of God's faithfulness in the middle of that, he would have given up faith and he would have given up hope. And so he goes from this place of this pit now into this guy Potiphar's house. Potiphar is basically the secret service of the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt. He was the captain of the king's guard, and he oversaw all of the security for the Pharaoh. You couldn't find anybody closer to Pharaoh than Potiphar. And what looked like the end of Joseph's dream was actually just a repositioning of Joseph a little bit closer to what God had spoken to him. And Joseph had to maintain this mentality and this faith that said, God is going to be faithful even though I'm in this pit, even though I'm now sold into slavery. And as he maintained that and he celebrated the high points of the past, God began to do a work in him. And Potiphar saw that God's hand was on him. And when Potiphar saw God's hand was on him, Potiphar elevated him to second in command in his house. Now, Joseph probably didn't know it at the time, but God had positioned him as close as he could possibly get him to Pharaoh, which would be the fulfillment of the dream. I'm sure it didn't feel like that when his brothers were betraying him. So as he gets into Potiphar's house, Potiphar's wife, she takes a liking to this young man. And so one day she's like, hey, Joseph, why don't you take off those Jerusalem cruisers and come hang out with me? Blink, blink. He's like, no, I can't do that. I'm not going to betray he's given me everything except you. He's given me authority over everything except you. Why would I sin against him and against God? But here's the thing about Joseph. The whole reason she said what she said to him is he got closer than he should have gotten to her. He had made some mistakes. He had made some mistakes. For Joseph and Potiphar's wife to be alone in the house together, for her to advance on him, was a mistake. He should have never been there. And so when she advances on him, he's like, no, I got to get out of here. And he resisted the temptation. But as he fled, she grabbed his coat and she held a piece of his clothing, and it was an element of his mistake that she used against him. And so she yelled to the guards, and she's like, he tried to attack me, sexually attack me. And she had this cloak of his, and so he ended up going to prison. Now, she wrongfully accused him, but it still put him in prison. Here's a second point I want you to get. That we have to remember that God is faithful even when we make mistakes. You may have had some things from 2024 that didn't pan out the way that they were supposed to, and you probably, most likely, made some mistakes in that. And when we make mistakes in those kind of things, the marriage that failed, the business partner that left us, the financial ruin that happened, whatever, the kids that don't serve God, whatever happened in our lives, we always find where we made mistakes that caused that. And we are our worst own critics a lot of times. And we can say, well, God is not going to fulfill the dream in me because I screwed up. I made mistakes there. But look at me very closely. God's faithfulness to what he's called you to is not dictated by your mistakes. Your mistakes do not erase God's faithfulness. God was still working to get Joseph to the palace, even though he made some mistakes. God was still working that plan, even though Joseph probably should not have been that close to another man's wife. But God was still working in his life. We all make those mistakes. But you can't allow your part in the pain to make you think that God doesn't care, or that he somehow has forgotten about you. So Joseph finds himself in prison. Now what's interesting is the prison now puts him close to the palace. He's not just in Potiphar's house. He's now in the same structure. He's within the city. And God was still moving him, even in his mistakes. God was still moving him closer to God's plan for his life. God was still faithful. He took him from pit to power, and he took him out of power and he put him in prison. And each step of the way, God was still working. Number 3, we have to remember that God is faithful even when we are overlooked. So as Joseph gets into this prison, he's there with some other people that have been imprisoned out of Pharaoh's court. There's the cupbearer who drinks all the wine before the king drinks it to make sure there's no poison in it. How many guys like that job? Has a little extra hazard pay. Not much, but a little bit. So there's the cupbearer, there's the baker, the candlestick maker, and they're all there in prison, and not really a candlestick maker, but just the baker and the cupbearer. And so Joseph interprets dreams for these guys. And he interprets a dream for the baker, and the interpretation of the dream is you're actually going to be executed. And so the dream comes to pass, the baker was executed, but then he has an interpretation of the dream for the cupbearer. And the interpretation of the dream for the cupbearer was that you're going to be reinstated. And so Joseph plays a critical role. The dreamer is now helping other people's dreams. And he tells the cupbearer, he says, when you get back to Pharaoh's court, will you please remember me? And guess what happened? He forgot all about him. He forgot all about him. He overlooked him. He wouldn't have ended up back in Pharaoh's court if it hadn't been for Joseph. But as he went on to bigger and better things, he overlooked Joseph. Sometimes in our life, as we're trying to work out our dreams, there are moments where we feel overlooked. God, where were you? Why didn't this happen? Where was that person? They were supposed to be there for me. Why didn't they call me? Why didn't they text me when I was hurting? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And sometimes we can feel so overlooked, and the negativity from that moment of obscurity can make us feel like God's faithfulness is no longer for us. So Joseph, for 2 long years, sat in that prison after the cupbearer had been reinstated. 2 years of obscurity. 2 years to think about his life. 2 years to wonder, is he ever going to say anything to Pharaoh? 2 years to think about the mistakes he made with Potiphar's house. 2 years to think about how he arrogantly told his dream to his brothers that got him thrown into a pit. 2 years to wonder if God was ever going to get him out of that. 2 years. He was 14 years into this journey that God was taking him on. It was 2 years of silence and solitude to wonder if God was ever going to get him out of this mess. But God's faithfulness is not predicated on who sees us and who doesn't. Just because you might have been overlooked last year in something that you thought somebody should have seen doesn't mean that God is still not going to take you where you need to be. It's the process. The cupbearer overlooked Joseph, but God did not. God was actually working on Pharaoh's heart while Joseph was being overlooked. And while the cupbearer was not following through with what he was supposed to do, God was giving Pharaoh dreams. And there was nobody to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And finally, after God had set the scene and had positioned Pharaoh where he needed him to be, Pharaoh, troubled by the lack of interpretation of the dream, starts reaching out to everybody in his court. Who is going to help me understand the meaning of this? And finally, the cupbearer says, 2 years ago, dang, I was supposed to tell you about this, but I overlooked it. This guy, Joseph, he interpreted my dream, and I bet he could interpret yours, Pharaoh. And God took this kid who had a dream all the way from the pit to a place of power, back into prison, and was now pulling him up to the palace so that he could realize God's purpose for his life. And the whole reason Joseph was able to make it through that journey and not throw in the towel or give up is that he consistently went back and celebrated the moments that God had been faithful. You may have some pain in your life from 2024, but I guarantee you there are moments, bright spots of God's faithfulness. If you focus on the negative, you'll forget the faithfulness. If you focus on the faithfulness, it will build your faith for the future. We've got to remember that God is always faithful. He's faithful to turn around our situations. And he'll turn around your situation. You just have to remember that he's faithful. I love this last verse. Joseph is elevated into Pharaoh's court. He's made number 2 in the entire land of Egypt. And during a famine that is ravaging the whole area, Egypt becomes the wealthiest nation in the region, if not the world. And people now are coming from around the whole region to buy food just so that they can survive. And they're honoring this guy, Joseph, and his dream of the wheat bowing down to him, and the sun, moon, and stars bowing down to him is now beginning to be realized after a long and arduous journey full of ups and downs. And the people who betrayed him in the beginning show up to buy food. Now, they don't know that it's Joseph because they, in their minds, murdered their brother. But he knows who they are. And in Genesis 50 and verse 20, it says this, as he speaks to his brothers. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so that I could save the lives of many people." He remembered God's faithfulness through the ups and through the downs. And he celebrated those things when they began to become a prescriptor of where God was going to take him in the future. And here's what I want to do. I just want to spend a moment. I want to pray for you in the areas of this past year that maybe are not your best. Doesn't mean that God has forgotten about you. You just have to remember that he's faithful in all areas. So if this message is just tugging on your heart today, would you just take a moment and place your hand over your heart? Maybe you had some things you went through, some betrayal that you dealt with, some business dealings that didn't work out the way they're supposed to, some relationships, some family, some money, whatever it is. And it has tried to become the loudest voice for your future. We're going to get rid of that today. Father, I pray for every single person within the sound of my voice, in-house and online. God, I pray today that the revelation that you are always for us, you are always faithful. When everybody else is unfaithful, God, you are faithful. And even when it feels like you're not around, God, we know that you are. We know that you're always working behind the scenes. You're always turning it around to our good. So God, I pray for your children today. Pray that you would give us hope. Pray that you would give us bright spots to celebrate and to focus on. I pray that you would increase our faith today, God. And I pray that this next year would be a year of turnaround. I pray that this next year would be a year of your faithfulness. I pray that this next year would be a year that dreams and visions are realized, that purposes and plans come to pass, God. I pray that this year would be a year of return, God, that it would be a year of blessing on your people. Psalm 65:11, I believe it is, that he crowns the year with goodness and abundance. I pray that for your kids today, God, that you would crown this next year with your goodness and abundance. In Jesus' name.